We're going to be in 2 Chronicles 14 this morning. 2 Chronicles chapter 14. I've been reading through my daily Bible study, and at work there this week I come upon these chapters, chapter 14 and 15, and was looking at Asa and the life of Asa, and the Lord began to lay a message on my heart, and I began to think, well, is it important? Is it important? And the first point is to seek God. Is it important to seek God? As we look in chapter 14 here, it says, So Abijah slept with his fathers, and they buried him in the city of David, and Asa his son reigned in his stead. In his days the land was quiet 10 years. So as we begin to look and begin to think about this, I begin to think about that family tree, about the importance of serving God or seeking God and doing the things of God. You look into Asa's family tree, and David was his, would have been his great-great-grandfather. So we know that David was a man after God's own heart, and that David had united the kingdoms, and through David the kingdoms were prosperous, and had done all the things that God had asked, and they had prospered because of this. Then we see Solomon come on to the scene there, and Solomon's kingdom prospered. It says that Solomon, because he followed God, was the wisest man, and God appointed riches and things of this nature to him because he desired to follow him. Then we saw Rehoboam come on the scene after Solomon. This was Solomon's son, and Rehoboam split the kingdom. If you'll remember, they came to him and they asked him if he would ease up on them a little bit. And he went to the older advisors, that had been the advisors of his father Solomon. And those advisors said it would be a good thing for you to keep the kingdom united and ease up just a little. And when you do that, they're going to follow you. They're going to love you. They're going to do the things that you require of them. And then he left them and he went to the young advisors, and the young advisors said, Pour it on, baby. Give them a little more. So he listened to the young advisors, and kingdom was ripped. Right there. His kingdom was separated. After Rehoboam, we see Abijah. This was Rehoboam's son. He ruled 3 years. And then when he passed away, here we see in this verse that he buried him in the city of David, and his son Asa reigned in his stead. We really don't know how old Asa was. From reading the commentaries and things of that nature, he's probably about Wayne's age whenever he started reigning over this kingdom. Be a big responsibility, wouldn't it, Wayne? For you to have to reign over a kingdom. How would you like it if we made you president of the United States? You don't think you'd like it too well. Be a big responsibility. Well, it was a big responsibility for Asa. And if you think, as I said, about that family tree, he had godly heritage in that family tree. But over the last few men that had sat on that throne, they had declined. Kingdom had been rent, had been torn into 2 pieces. They'd started following after strange gods. They'd started doing the things that all the neighboring cities and religions, all the different things that were going on. They'd started following after all those different things. It was kind of a hodgepodge of religions and things of that nature. So we find now this young man sitting on the throne that had been given to him, and this was God's kingdom. We know it was established because of God. The first thing that kind of come to my mind is, well, this is probably not going to be good when I read to the end of that verse. It said he had peace, though, for the first 10 years, right? I figured God was giving him ample time there since he was young to kind of get things established, and then I figured we'd see things tailing off. But in verse 2, it says, and Asa did that which was good and right in the eyes of the Lord his God. When we look at this is a summary of Asa. It's a summary of Asa's life. We look at the example that was set before him, and the example wasn't real well, but we see Asa's life, and it says here that somehow Asa determined, somehow Asa knew that he needed to follow after God, that he needed to do the things that God asked, that God wanted him to do. Now, it's kind of amazing that those things happened. The example that he had wasn't a very good example. The Bible tells us in Romans chapter 3, verses 11 and 12, it says, there is none that understandeth, there is none that seeketh after God. They all are gone out of the way, they are together become unprofitable. There is none that doeth good, no, not one. So the Bible tells us that in our nature, we don't follow God. We don't seek God. We don't strive to find God. Those things are not in our nature. We can't find Him without God to begin with, can we? But he had somehow decided, some way figured out, that he needed to follow God. And in verse 3 it says, and for he took away the altars of the strange gods in the high places. He brake down the images and cut down the groves. He commanded Judah to seek the Lord God of their fathers and to do the law and the commandment. Also he took away out of all the cities of Judah the high places and the images and the kingdoms, and the kingdom was quiet before him. He built fenced cities in Judah, for the land had rest, and he had no war in those years, because the Lord had given him rest. And therefore he said unto Judah, let us build these cities, let's make about them walls and towers, gates and bars, while the land is yet before us. Because we have sought the Lord our God, we have sought him, and he hath given us rest on every side. So they built and prospered. So we see here that Asa, somehow he figured out, somehow he knew that he needed to follow God, and that's exactly what he done. You know, against all odds, he found that. We see his life summary that he had decided that it was good. He had lived a life that was good before God. He had done the things that he should. The Bible tells us that he began to tear down the high places, began to do away with the strange gods. He broke down the images. He cut down the groves. He done everything that he needed to do that those before him had not done and had allowed to grow up before him. Asa here ruled 41 years. And out of those 41 years, God gave him 35 years of peace. You know, in this period of time, when you think about this period of time, that was unheard of. You know, because they were always coming against each other in battle. It was constant. But God gave him 35 years of peace. You know, Asa wasn't perfect, but he had determined that he himself and Judah needed to be holy. They needed to follow after God, and they needed to do the things that needed to be done to follow after God. In 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 15, it says, but as he which hath called you is holy, so be ye holy in all manner of conversation. Because it is written, be ye holy, for I am holy. Somehow, Asa had figured that out. And he had decided to seek God. And because of that, we see some of God's blessings on him, don't we, in some of those verses there. And I don't want to get ahead of myself. But Judah, as we knew it, like I said, had fallen into idol worship. They had begun to do the things that they shouldn't have done. And Asa here had found God. And I'm going to skip down to verse 11 for just a second, and then we'll go back into some of those other verses. It says, and Asa cried unto the Lord his God and said, Lord, it is nothing with thee to help, whether with many or whether with them that have no power. Help us, O Lord our God, for we rest on thee. And in thy name we go against this multitude. O Lord, thou art our God, let no man prevail against thee. Asa knew that it was important to follow God, and like I said, he had told Judah to get away from the idol worship, to get away from those things, and to follow God in all that he done. Judah here had begun to follow a lot of those different strange gods, as I said, Asheroth and Baal and different ones, and they were kind of related to fertility gods. Asheroth is also known as Isis, or the Queen of Heaven. And these groves and high places, they were sex shrines is what they were. And the women would go up there and get involved in these things and become prostitutes for these false gods and things of that nature. And it had just turned into a real mess. And then in our life, as I thought about this and looked at this in our life, I thought, well, how do we allow those things to happen? How do they come about? And how do we get to that point? And I'm thinking a lot of times we don't even recognize it. Because the images of some of these gods are still used and are very visible today in our world. One of them is on a very popular coffee. I'm just going to go ahead and tell you, Starbucks. The picture on Starbucks is of Asheroth, Isis. So it's a false god. And they've got it advertised right there. We sometimes don't even see those things, do we? But Asa knew that Judah needed to rid themselves of those things. We don't recognize them in our today's world, but we need to rid ourselves of those groves and high places in our lives today too. Now I'm wondering how many of us have those things in our lives. You may be sitting there thinking, well, I don't have anything that I'm worshiping. I don't have anything that I'm following. I don't have anything that would come against or affect my life. But what about pride? What about lust? What about materialism? I mean, we see that all over the world that we live in, don't we? Materialism. We've got to have the biggest and greatest and grandest and fanciest and all those other things. We see that mindset. How about bitterness or anger? We allowed those things to become gods to us. How about fear or worry? You see, we in our lives have to choose. Just the same as Asa here walked out and he told Judah, you need to choose. You need to choose who you're going to serve. And he told them why. He said, God's holy. We need to serve God because He's a holy God. But we have to choose, don't we, in our lives, who we're going to serve. Are we going to serve God? Or are we going to serve self? If we're serving some of these gods that I mentioned, pride and lust and materialism, things of that nature, then we're serving self, aren't we? We need to get away from that and begin to allow God to have His way in our lives, to begin to make us holy because He's holy. So, I asked, is it important to seek God? Yeah, it's important to seek God. Asa here knew that it was important to seek God, and that therefore he sort of directed and guided Judah to doing those things. And what was the result of that? Well, the first result we notice right off the bat, it says the land was quiet 10 years. And then I told you he was there for 41 years, and God gave him 35 years of peace. So the first thing that we notice is rest, right? If we serve God, He's going to give us rest. He's going to give us rest. That's exactly what He gave Asa and Judah. He prospered Asa and Judah. There in those verses 6 and 7, it says that they built cities. They went out and they built and they were able to prosper through those things. They prospered and built fortified cities all around them. They had peace. God was so gracious and good to them because they followed Him. In verse 8 there it says, and Asa had an army of men that bare targets and spears out of Judah, 300,000. And out of Benjamin that bare shields and drew bows, 280,000. And all these were mighty men of valor. So it tells us here that God gave him a 580,000 man army. Would give you quite a feeling of security, wouldn't it? To know that you had 580,000 men of valor that were there willing and ready to protect. Quite a feeling of security. But in verse 9 it says, "And there came out against him Zerah the Ethiopian, with a host of 1,300 chariots, and came unto Marisah." So it tells us here that Zerah the Ethiopian came out against them, and he had 1,000,000-man army. Now, I'd feel pretty secure if I had 580,000 men of valor watching over me, and our army may be that big. Our military may be that big. I don't know. But I feel quite secure in that. But then to know that somebody come out against them that had 1,000,000-man army, 1,000,000 foot soldiers. And then they had 300, it says, 300 chariots. That was the ancient tank. So imagine in your mind, you're there with your group of soldiers. There's a large group of you, 580,000. That's a pretty good group of people. And you see this storm of people coming at you on foot, and then 300 tanks. That would be kind of in our mind what we could imagine. That's kind of the way they felt. 300 tanks rolling across the hill to support those 1,000,000 people. We see all that come out. In verse 10 there it says, "And they set the battle in array in the valley of Zephatah. And Asa cried unto the Lord his God, and said, Lord, it is nothing with thee to help, whether with many or whether with them that have no power. Help us, O Lord our God, for we rest on thee." He put his trust totally and completely in God. And what God did, I don't know that it surprised him, but sometimes maybe it surprises us when we put our trust totally and completely in God and we see God work in mighty ways. I think sometimes maybe it surprises us. But with Asa here, he put his trust totally and completely in God. And he said, we're going to go out in thy name against this multitude, because you're our God. Let no man prevail against thee. And it says, so the Lord smote the Ethiopians before Asa and before Judah, and the Ethiopians fled. And Asa and the people that were with him pursued them unto Gerar, and the Ethiopians were overthrown, and they could not recover themselves, for they were destroyed before the Lord and before his host. And they carried away very much spoil. And they smote all the cities round about Gerar, and the fear of the Lord came upon them. And they spoiled all the cities, for there was exceeding much spoil in them. So we see here what God done. When they humbled themselves, when they cried out to God, they had already done the things that they needed to do, we see that God gave them deliverance. He gave them deliverance. You know, it's important in our lives that we remember the results and we understand the results that we get whenever we trust God in everything that we have. He'll give us rest. He'll prosper us. He'll give us peace. He gives us security. He gives us deliverance. All we have to do is remember to go to Him for all those things, don't we? In chapter 15, it says, and the Spirit of God came upon Azariah, the son of Oded, and he went out and met Asa, and said to him, hear ye me, Asa, and all Judah and Benjamin. The Lord is with you while you be with him, and if you seek him, he will be found of you. But if you forsake him, he will forsake you. Now, I'm not going to read all that. You can read everything there. But they took of their spoil, and they sacrificed oxen, they sacrificed sheep in the hundreds of thousands. There was a renewed exuberance for God in Judah. It says that they all turned to God. They all made a pact that they would serve the one true and living God. that if anybody in Judah said they wouldn't serve, they put them to death. There was a renewed exuberance, a renewed desire to serve the Lord. All because one man did that which was good in the sight of God. We go through life and we don't think about what may come from our daily actions, or what may come from our response to something that has gone on in our life. But the truth is, it's very important how we respond, or it's very important how we react and act on our daily lives, because those around are watching. All these people here, this 580,000 went out against that million because the king told them they had to. If you went against the king, what happened to you this time? Well, if the enemy didn't kill you, then he would, right? If you didn't go out. So they all went out because of him, but they all believed because of what God done. He said God delivered them. He delivered them out of the hands of the Egyptians, and then he smote the Egyptians. He destroyed the Egyptians before the Lord, and they were able to carry away and spoil the Egyptians as they come against them. He's shown them exactly what he can do. Now, if we trust him, what could he do in our lives? What could he do in our world? And the thing is, we have to choose, don't we? We have to choose whether or not we're going to serve God, as Asa did here, or whether or not we're going to choose self. Now, I'm not going to tell you Asa was perfect, because as you read on, if you read on after the scriptures that I use, and I hope you do sometimes, because the stories go on. They don't end where I stopped. With Asa here, his story went on, and he got to where he didn't believe. He got to where he wanted to do things on his own. Didn't follow the way that he should. So he wasn't perfect. But the summary of his life was he did that which was good and right in the eyes of God. And I think that'd be a wonderful thing for people to say about us when it comes time for us to go off the scene in this world. I think it'd be a good thing for them to say, you did that what was good and right in the sight of God. I think that would be a good testimony. But we have to choose whether we're going to serve God or self. So today, are you going to choose God, or are you going to choose self? Are you going to have a renewed desire to serve him, to follow him, to trust in him? Or are you going to follow self and rely on self for the things that are out there? If you would, stand with me today.